People ask me what camera they should invest in all the time. I usually pick the annoying and diplomatic answer and ask what kind of filmmaking jobs that they're pursuing. If there's an answer to that question, my answer will be different every time depending on what kind of features they need. If they have no idea, are on a budget, and want to be ready for absolutely anything, this is the camera that I recommend. I'll explain why. Let's start with the design. The Sony FX30 has a really great feel to it. Its magnesium alloy chassis feels really dense and tough and has a nice weight to it. It feels premium and comfortable in the hand. The quarter 20s that pepper the top, sides, and bottom of the camera are really useful too. The controls are also exceptional. Feeling like a cross between a mirrorless and a cinema body, everything is customizable and adjustable, but I don't usually change too much because the existing buttons and functions make a lot of sense. There are physical buttons for white balance, ISO, iris, focus magnification, display, peaking, zebras, and shutter, and several others including 3 control dials, a zoom rocker, and a fantastic joystick, all of which can be remapped. Ergonomically, you're going to be chilling like an absolute villain in almost any situation. There's also a removable top handle if you want another contact point. It feels a bit cheap and it's on the shorter side, which is disappointing, but a handle extension from your favorite rigging brand will fix both of those issues, plus the handle adds 2 full-size XLRs with physical audio controls. It is so nice to not have to bring mini adapters around and plug full-size XLRs directly in, and the audio signal is communicated to the camera through the multi-interface shoe, so there's no cabling required there. The rest of the I/O selection consists of a 3.5mm in and out, micro USB, and a USB-C that supports power delivery, and a beautiful full-size HDMI that can output 16-bit RAW if you're feeling spicy. On the other side, there are dual SD card slots that also accept CF Express Type A if you have lots of expendable income. The onboard monitor is fairly bright, sharp, and fully articulating. It also has touch controls for autofocus, which we'll talk about in a second. Powering everything are Sony's NP-F-Z batteries, which will give you around 2 hours of 4K 24fps, which is really nice, especially since they're super cheap when you go to buy a couple extra ones. There isn't a viewfinder anywhere on the body, which makes sense for the cinema line. If you want to trade the filmmaking features for a viewfinder, the A6700 is the way to go since they have the same sensor and processor, which is solid. This is Sony's 23.3 by 15.5mm APS-C sensor with an effective pixel count of 6192 by 4128. That means in photo mode, you get a 26 megapixel sensor, and in video, you get a downsampled 6K up to 60 FPS. Cined's charts show the FX30 sensor scoring a total patch range of 14.6 stops, 12.6 stops at a signal-to-noise ratio of 1, and 11.4 at a signal-to-noise ratio of 2. Sometimes Sony increases their clean stop count by employing heavy noise reduction, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the color grading demo. Rolling shutter at worst will take 15.9 milliseconds to scan, which isn't world-class, but you should be fine. I didn't see any skewing in any of my test footage. Sony E-Mount is my personal favorite lens mount at the moment. Flange distance is short, so it's easy to adapt anything, and the selection of native E-Mount lenses is truly massive and excellent. You should be able to find whatever you need at plenty of different price points. Sony's autofocus is also the best in the industry, but I can't actually show you because I only own manual lenses at the moment. I'll link some great videos that include autofocus tests if you're interested. IBIS is also included. I try to avoid using stabilization whenever I can, but in a pinch, Sony's IBIS systems are really great. It doesn't overdo things and add warps and wobbles and whatever else, it just levels out micro jitters. The standard mode operates exactly the way you hope it would, and active crops in a bit to stabilize a touch more aggressive. I actually will go into the settings sometimes and tell the camera it's a wider lens by a few millimeters in order to get less stabilization, which might be a terrible idea, but it seems to be less sticky that way. Sony's excellent gyro stabilization is also included, but make sure you turn off IBIS and crank your shutter up to avoid motion blur artifacts. At worst, it looks like decent warp stabilization, and at best, you can almost replace your gimbal at the cost of the shutter speed drawback and your lens being native E-mount only, which again is why I can't show you, but I'll put a link down there in the description. I love shooting with this sensor. I remember reviewing the A6700 and being really impressed with the image quality, and here we go again. And any pillar of image quality you can think of, the FX30 does it well. Dynamic range is easy to work with, roll-off is great, rolling shutter isn't an issue, detail is very high, colors are awesome, shutter roll-off is clean, noise is granular, it's all here. I know we already covered all of this in the A6700 video because this has the exact same sensor and image processor, but I thought we could jump into Resolve really quick and just do a little bit of grading. There's a couple things to note here. So we're going to put the standard tree on. This was recorded in S-Log3, so we need to go find Sony S-Gamut 3.Cine. I actually learned a new trick from a comment in the last video. If you hit one of these drop downs and then you hit a letter, it'll bring you down to what you're looking for. The shot's looking a little magenta. I also want to fix the exposure, so we'll go to global exposure, bring it up just a little bit, and then I want to go to my RGB. I want to look at everybody individually, primaries, push a little bit of green. I'm mainly looking at the snow here, which is represented in the waveform down here, almost at 70 IRE. We just want to make sure that it looks a little bit more white. Doesn't need to be perfect. Little changes like that little white balance adjustment and that exposure adjustment. The footage took it really well, and it just is representing the changes that we made. I'm used to 8-bit on my Canon C200, and even this change right here would start to create little cracks in the image, and you would start to see that it's being pushed a little bit too far. So I love the XAVCS, the 10-bit, the 422, the data rate, everything is very willing to give you room to grade in. Another thing to note, Remy's coat, she's a chocolate lab. Her coat is honestly very chocolatey in color. It's brown. It's like a rich, not quite reddish, but it's a true brown. And most cameras, specifically what I'm coming from, which is again a Canon C200, her coat falls into like a black, almost like a purple. I don't know what YouTube's gonna do to shift the hue in any way, but this is a perfect representation of what her coat actually looks like. It's brown, her little mouth and her nose are a little bit more reddish. This is a really hard color to nail in a lot of cameras that I've used and tested. And Sony sensors, at least the new Sony sensors, seem to nail it every single time. So I'm gonna press Shift 1 and load that grade, and then we'll go to this next one. Here's a skin tone test. So I'll go Command 1 to print that, and then we'll zero out our adjustment. This is nothing but a color space transform going into a color space transform. So this is what the original log would look like, and that's what it looks like after transform. And this is very, very, very close. We'll open up the vector scope to see if we zoom in here a little bit. Keep your eye on this skin tone line here. If we're going right on my skin tone through varying levels of darkness, it is right on this line. Maybe a little bit too rich in the reds. You don't get this richness and this color separation in a lot of cameras, and this is, I think, really impressive. This green shirt is very challenging for sensors to get right, and it's absolutely nailing it. The green is really good, skin tone's really good. Another weird thing, a lot of cameras shift my hair into a darker, sort of almost black color, especially down here in the darker spots, and it is picking up that indeed my hair is brown in the sensor. Super impressive, love the colors right out of the gate. Sony really has made huge strides in the past couple years, and I actually prefer Sony sensors, or at least Sony color science, over most brands now. I feel the most at home, and that's probably because I've used them the most. Load that into slot 1, paste it here. Just wanted to show, we already kind of saw this in the shirt, but these sort of rich hunter greens, forest greens show up really nicely. This is an older shot. It's spring here in Michigan now, but this is from the winter. This is an A6700 shot, actually. It represents greens really well. Okay, here's another shot from the winter. And I wanted to show a little bit of a noise pattern. Now, the sky is reflecting the snow that's on the ground, so it is appearing a little bit brighter. That's something to note. But I'm gonna zoom in here. This is bumped up to the second native ISO. This is a much, much better noise pattern than I've seen on any recent Sony sensors, especially versus the A7S III FX3 FX6 sensor that has on the second native ISO. There's a lot of aggressive noise reduction. You end up with these big, colorful, blocky, kind of smeary, muddy noise blocks all over the place. This looks really fine, really granular. I'll press play. You can tell that there's some noise reduction happening because there's not perfect pixel level noise. There is some smearing here. This is a really, really good result, especially for that second native ISO, and it makes it really easy to denoise, really easy to work with. And in most cases, like in this shot specifically, I would not do anything to reduce the noise actually, because I think it adds a nice texture to the shot. We'll copy into slot 1, go to this one, paste. Really great performance. All around, I have absolutely nothing to complain about. It's super reliable. You can get a good image in almost any situation. There's nothing weird to work around. The files are relatively small, but are capable of being pushed around in your grading suite. Really impressed all around. I was impressed with the A6700 last time, and the FX30 is no different. It is really a fantastic sensor. I recommend the FX30 so much because it can do almost anything. If you're shooting photos, content creation, weddings, basically anything, this is a great choice. The sensor is fantastic at both stills and cinematic work, but definitely lends itself more as a compact cinecam or a B camera. I know some people argue that this isn't a real cinema camera because it doesn't have shutter angle or something. I guess I don't have an opinion on that, except that it's weird to waste time in your life arguing with other people on whether a camera should be considered a camera or a cinema camera. It doesn't really matter what it's called, just use the best tool for the job, and I have a feeling the FX30 is the right tool for a whole bunch of filmmakers. The best part about the FX30 is the price. We get all of that for $2,200 USD, and if you don't need the top handle, you can save $400, which I think is a value proposition that is pretty hard to beat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.